In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful. Dear students, today we are going to talk about structuralism again. In our last class, we talked about Saussurean concept of structuralism. And we have read different ideas given by Saussure. And here we will be talking about that how Saussure's ideas, they have been manipulated by linguists as well as literary critics. There are many people that we can talk about, but we cannot talk about all of them today. So some of them that I have chosen today, they are Propp, Genette, Gerald, Todorov, and Strauss. And one by one, we will be reading from different books that what is their contribution, and I will be explaining their philosophical ideas. So let's start with Propp. Propp, he worked on folk tales and he found out different kinds of, characteristics of folk tales. So 7 of the characteristics that Propp talks about are hero, false hero, villain, donor or provider, helper, princess and her father, and dispatcher. These are the characteristics that he, enlisted in his theory. And he said that these 7 characters, they perform almost 31 different kinds of functions. And after that, we move towards, Gerald Genette. So Genette was basically talking about narratology. In order to understand narratology's contributions to semiotics, it is important to grasp the distinction between its 3 fundamental entities: story, narrative, and narration. Genette believes that narrative consists of a story, discourse, and narration. They are all related by tense, mood, and voice. Story consists of the succession of events being narrated. So, of course, when we are reading novel, when we are reading a story, we find that it has got succession of, events, and they are being narrated by the narrator. The story thus provides the content of the tale in the order in which events actually happened to the characters, an order that does not always coincide with the order in which they are presented in the narrative. We have already read the distinction between story and plot. So story is talking about the succession, the continuation, the sequence of events which happen to the characters. But in the plot, we come across that how the narrator is explaining them. So narrator is representing them one by one. Sometimes something which happened later on is explained earlier, is represented earlier. And something which happened in the beginning, it is represented later. So plot is different from the story. But the succession of events being narrated is called a story. Narrative refers to the actual words on the page. The discourse, the text itself, the text or discourse itself is called narrative. Words on the page that we read, that is the narrative, from which the reader constructs both story and narration. From which the reader both constructs story and narration. So narrative we are reading, words on the page we are reading, that is narrative. And through narrative we are trying to understand the story. Narration refers to the act of telling the story to some audience and thereby producing the narrative. So narration is the act of production, act of producing the story. That is narration. When the narrator is narrating something, that is narration. And words, when they are spoken or when they are written, that is narrative. And through narrative, we try to understand the story. So these 3 concepts I have tried to enlist it here. Then Genette also talks about narrative, the words on the page, but he notes that all three levels work together. That is, for the purposes of analysis, he separates aspects of a text that do not operate separately, but he does so in order to see how they interact. He observes that story, narrative, and narration interact by means of three qualities, which he calls tense, mood, and voice. Tense is the arrangement of events in the narrative with respect to time. That arrangement involves the notion of order, duration, and frequency. So, dear students, other concepts which we are going to talk about now: order, duration, and frequency. So, of course, we know that what is the order of the story? The sequence. Sometimes something which happened to the characters, first it is explained later. So the order is determined by the narrator. The order of the story, that how he is telling you the story, okay? Something which happened to the characters, the succession of events, that is the story. But in what order they are explained, they are represented through narrative, through words on the page, that is order. So in what order, succession of events, they have been talked about in the story. Then there is duration. For example, something happened to somebody and that event continued for 5 years. So 5 years is a big period of time. But maybe the author or the narrator, they are telling the 5-year story in just 2 pages. 5 years are represented in 2 pages. So duration is curtailed. Lot of duration, lot of ideas, lot of things have not been explained by the author or the narrator, because they are manipulating the events of the story. They are the people who are telling us about the story, about the events. Then frequency. So something which is explained time and again, something which is mentioned only once, something which is mentioned twice, or something which is mentioned 5 or 10 times. So that is the frequency. So they are talking about the elements, the narratological aspects of the story. So 5 aspects: order, frequency, duration, voice, and mood. So then there is voice. Voice refers to the voice of the narrator. The voice we hear, the narrators, may not be the same as the eyes we see through, that is perspective. So narrator's voice can be there, but the eyes through which we are looking at the story, through which we are looking at the event, that is the perspective. Perspective refers to point of view, or the eyes through which we see any given part of the narrative. Although the narrator may be speaking, the point of view may be that of one of the other characters, and the feelings of a point of view character may be different from those of the narrator telling the character's story. Distance. Another idea which is discussed here is distance. Distance is created when the narrator is one of the characters in the narrative. Narrator is one of the characters in the narrative, a go-between through whose consciousness the story is filtered. The more intrusive the narrator is, the greater the distance between narration and story. Who is an intrusive narrator? Narrator is intrusive who is giving more details, who is making use of adjectives, who is talking about the description, the physical appearance of the character, that what he or she looks like, what he or she is wearing. So each and every detail the narrator is giving. If the narrator is talking about very minute details, the narrator is very intrusive. If the narrator is not talking about very minute details, then the narrator is distant. Mood is the atmosphere of the narrative created by distance and perspective. So this is how, dear students, Genette also talks about some of the elements, some of the narratological aspects of the story, of the narrative. So narratology, as I have already told you, is altogether a different subject in which you can talk about so many other things. Our task is not to talk about all these structures, but just to give you an idea that what are the aspects, what are the elements, what are the rules and regulations which are used by the storyteller. In structuralism, we are looking at the units, we are looking at the smaller units, how they are combined together to create the overall structure, to create the overall structure of the building, to create the overall structure of the culture. And art, literature is part of the culture. Then I talk about, Todorov. I have already given you the examples like this. X is a king. Y is X mother. X marries Y. Z is X father. X kills Z. So what comes to your mind? X is a king, X marries Y, Y is X mother, Z is X father, X kills Z, Oedipus Rex. So this is the internal structure of the drama Oedipus Rex. Same is the case, I have already talked about that there are three characters, for example, hero, heroine, stepmother, okay, and sometimes, the story that comes to our mind is Snow White or Cinderella. But Cinderella, which is produced in England or America, is a different kind of Cinderella. And Cinderella drama, which is produced in Pakistan, is a different kind of, Cinderella. Some of the aspects are different, but the internal structure remains the same. Even Indian movies that you come across, they will have the same internal structure, but from outside, outward appearance, there will be certain differences. So Todorov has given this, internal structure of the story. In this example, the first three, king, mother, and father, propositions dominate agents. They are specific people or nouns. Agents are the people who are performing in the drama, in the art. The first and last two propositions contain predicates or actions. So, of course, actions are performed by the agents. Characters are the agents, and agents, they perform the actions. Actions are shown through the verbs, and verbs, they play a very important role in any kind of story or novel or drama that you are reading. To be a king, to marry, and to kill. He then goes on to present to higher level of organization, sequence. A group of propositions form a sequence. Text, a group of sequences form text. When group of sentences or events, they are put together, they make text. The basic sequence is made up of 5 propositions which outline a basic state of narration that is disturbed and then re-established. For example, equilibrium, stability or peace. So this is how usually the drama or novel or movie it starts. Force, disruption of peace, enemy invades. Disequilibrium, climax, war starts. Force, in order to restore peace, enemy is defeated. Equilibrium, peace on new terms or on a form of compromise is established again. So this is how, dear students, Todorov, Genette, Propp, they were talking about the internal structures of the text. They were talking about the internal structures of the story, of the novel, of the drama. Then a succession of sequence form a text, and this text can be organized in several different ways. Embedding, a story within a story, digression. So we come across embedding, digression, linking a string of sequences, alteration, interlacing of sequencing, conglomeration, a mixture of all these forms. So this is how Todorov tried to identify the fundamental narrative units which come together to form larger structures in text. He aimed to develop a universal grammar which not only underlies all languages and signifying systems, but also act as a guidebook for all language and lays out even the most basic functions and responsibilities of all human beings. Well, dear students, our next supporter or follower of structuralism is Levi Strauss. Levi Strauss' perspective is that he establishes a science of mankind. He talks about ethnology, anthropology, gathers all human sciences in one. And again, he presents structural theory, notion of savage mind, and he studies myths and kinship system. He searches for the underlying patterns of thought in all forms of human activity. Again, he has taken these ideas from Saussure. Okay? And he is talking about basically, he is creating a division and creating a binary system. In structuralism, we come across binary system. I have already talked about binary system with you in some of my lectures. And kinship system I have also talked about. Who will marry whom? So these are the structural aspects of our culture. For example, being Muslims, we know that we cannot marry our aunts and uncles, and they cannot marry us. So we have got a structure which is working in our society, which is telling us that who will marry whom. So this is how, kinship system, it works. And then the binary is created. So we have got male and female. We have got light and darkness. We have got east and west. We have got nature and culture. Male, female, culture, nature, light, dark, hero, villain. So this is how, binary is created. So you will come across in all kinds of texts, dramas and novels, binary is there. You will come across, evil, and you will come across goodness. And in the end, the dramatist or the novelist will show you that evil is defeated and goodness wins. So when binary is created, one, thing, it is always privileged. So male is privileged in Western society. Culture is privileged in Western society. Light is privileged in Western society. West is privileged in Western society. So this idea of binary, it is also created in structuralism. It was also one of the contributions of Levi Strauss. He was studying myths, and he said that myths have a symbolic function. They are attempts to explain phenomena that are difficult to understand. Myths refers to an immemorial past. Myths are universal phenomena. Myths have universal structures. Myths have fundamental unit of a mytheme. So basically, again, the concept of universality is created. They have got universal structures. So all kinds of novels and dramas, binary is created. Some kind of universality is created. So when we have talked about hero, villain, heroine, king, mother, father, Oedipus Rex or Snow White or Cinderella. So this is how, characters, smaller units, smaller mythemes, they are created and they are universal. Whether story is written in Pakistan or in America, whether it is written in India or in, Britain, you will come across that all the movies, all the dramas, all the stories, they have got universal structures. They have got units. And these units, when they are combined, we get an overall structure. So in structuralism, we try to understand the underneath structures of the text. We try to understand that these structures, how they are put together and how they are presenting reality, how they are presenting different kinds of meanings to the people. So far as weakness of structuralism is concerned, structuralism is focusing on the internal structures of the text. It is not talking about the author. It is not talking about the role of the reader. So in structuralism also, author is given no importance. Reader is given no importance. Well, dear students, in the end, I would like to say that in structuralism, we have tried to understand the inherent structures of the text, of dramas, novels. Gerard, Genette, Propp, Todorov, Strauss, all of them, they tried to, expose the internal structures of the text. They created different kinds of formulas. They gave us different kinds of functions. They talked about different kinds of inherent units of the text. And this is how they divided the text into smaller units. And when these smaller units, they are put together, we get the overall structure of the text. So they tried to reduce, the text, folk tales or myths into smaller units. That is why they identified that there are 7 characters, or there are 9 characters, or there are 31 functions, or there are smaller, formulas. So they have tried to explain the inherent structures of the text. This is how structuralism works. This is how meanings are produced. That's all. Thank you very much.